Are we using this bit here rolling into it?
I edit this.
You don't have to edit it. Keep it. Here's what I want to say to the viewers. Peter has
There's no viewers. It's only listeners.
Sorry, the listeners. This is your 50th one.
That's right.
And from what I understand, you came up with this idea of wanting to have a real conversation with actors.
That's right.
You went to the Filmmaker magazine.
That's right.
So I want to say congratulations.
Thank you.
From the bottom of my heart, I want to say thank you.
I appreciate
for taking interest in the craft.
Yes.
And for taking a real interest in the craft, because, you know, we get lost in the hoopla so much.
That's right.
And God bless you, man. And I hope this. I hope I give you everything you want on this podcast, and I hope you keep doing what you're doing.
That moves me, man. I really appreciate that.
And you're going to keep that on. You're not going to edit yourself out.
How can I take that out? I'd be an idiot if I edited this out.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Michael Mando is an actor. He sat down with me in Midtown Manhattan to talk about the work.
Do you have a typical way that you begin your preparation for a role? What's your first step? You're alone with the script.
Well, it starts before that. I think it starts with when you pick the job. I think that's really where it starts. So, you know, I think I've been notorious for saying no to things, which is not always a good place to be, especially, you know, if you're trying to buy a house or a car or whatever it is, or you're trying to get to a certain place, you know, in your mind of where you want to be. When you're saying that, when you don't work a lot, it's sometimes harder. But so it starts with why you pick the project. That's where my preparation starts. It starts with a script will come along, or maybe a screen test or an audition or whatever it is, and I read it and I'm like, would I really want to do this? So that's where my preparation actually really starts. And I'll say, you know, who's directing, who's producing, who are the other actors, and I'd say, you know, I think I'm interested in this. I think I'd like to do this. So that starts. Now you start wanting to do this because of where you are in your life, what you've just done, what you're going through, and what you really feel like you need to express in that moment. So I always try to pick a project where I'm like, I can put my whole being behind this at this exact moment. That's why a lot of time the best projects are not just in relation to the project, but to the project and where you are in your life. You see what I mean?
Right. So you're saying if you were at a different point in your life, that project might not be the right fit for you at that point.
So that's where it starts. So you're going through life and you're going, this thing comes, like for example, the Hummingbird Project. You know, I've never shot in Montreal a movie in like 5 years. It was a French-Canadian director. It was a role that was very different from anything I've done. It was shooting in the forest. You know, it was about high-frequency trading, but more interesting than that was I really loved the nobility and the dignity of the character. I was just coming off of playing Better Call Saul, which was a completely different world. And I really the message of the film really resonated with me. And I felt like, you know, everything fits. So when you're approaching a project like that, you're already starting with the preparation of, this is what I want. I really need to explore this for those reasons. And then it starts with the written word. For me, I come from the theater, you know, classical text is kind of my first love. Molière and Shakespeare and Ibsen and all that kind of stuff. And everything starts on the page. So that's where really the work really starts. And when a script is really well written and when you're inspired, it's not just the words, it's all that empty space between the words. It's the empty space between the lines. It's the descriptions. You know, why is he wearing a red shirt? Why red? You know, why is it that the director brings attention to that ring or his fingernails? And you start piecing all those things together from the script. And it just starts taking a life of its own from there. You start researching. You know, for Better Call Saul, I was fascinated with like the Aztec cultures and the Mayans and you know, human sacrifice and all that stuff, which kind of fed me and took me in very strange directions because I wanted to understand the historical culture of the character that I was playing. For the Hummingbird Project, Mark Vega is an engineer, and there was this whole thing about digging and about the earth and you know, what does that really mean? You know, why are we, the straight line. This movie is a movie about, for people who are listening who don't know, it's a movie that's about to be released in a week. It's starring Jesse Eisenberg, Alexander Skarsgård, Salma Hayek, myself. It's directed by Kim Nguyen, the Hummingbird Project. It's about high frequency trading. So my character is the engineer who builds a fiber optic line from Kansas to New York. Now this line needs to be as straight as possible, because the straighter the line, the faster the information. And the faster the information, the more money you make. So for me, that was an interesting little story on its own, and I started thinking, what does it mean to me? What's a straight line mean to me? What's the lesson here? And there you just go.
And so it sounds like you dipped into this in a way that's different maybe than other actors would. You wanted to understand it from a symbolic way. Or
you don't, like, I can't tell you, like, you know, for example, I go back to Saul in about a month. We go in April 2019, we start shooting season 5. I don't know how I'm going to prepare for that season yet, but once you start getting into it, when you start getting a script, it takes a life of its own. And in terms of symbolism, I absolutely, you know, I love the philosopher Carl Jung. And, you know, he says something really interesting, and Joseph Campbell echoes that, you know, hero's journey. And he says to the brain, and I'm not sure how true that is scientifically, but the experience for it, for me, feels true, which is, what's the difference between the dream I had last night, me, the memory of you walking into this room, right now we're in New York, you walked into this room, the memory that happened 5 minutes ago, and the memory of a movie that I saw. To the brain, you know, it's so interesting. They all feel like they're the same. You know, our perception of what is real and what is not real is, so much of that is perception. So when you talk about symbolism, I think that's the way I think that's part of the way I see the world. You know, I always feel like I'm always trying to get to the root of why do I exist? What does this mean to me? And I think the work, you know, the art is an extension of that desire to understand that.
Can you take me back to when you first got the bug, the acting bug? Like, what was the origin for you to want to devote your life to this particular art?
The very first time I remember having a connection to it, I was in, I think, elementary school. We were in French class, and I was probably under 12, maybe 12, 13. And we were watching a movie about the life of the playwright Molière, the French writer. I think it's a movie made in like late 70s. And there was something about Molière that I responded to, his relationship with his mother. My parents are divorced, and I didn't grow up with my mother, but I was very close and affected by that divorce. And his distaste for the doctors, who were these sort of figures of false authority, you know, kind of these people that governed his life and governed his mother's life and ultimately her death. And they were these false authorities. And I remember he wrote plays to express, I think, his truth, you know. And it was weird, I was 13 and I felt, you know, that's me in another life. But I never, ever thought I would ever do it or revisited it until about a decade later. I was about 23, 24. My mother got into a very horrible situation where she was, I think this is the first time I talk about it, but she was robbed and she was shot in her stomach. And a couple of months later, I got shot. And my life was just going through a lot of, you know, it was moving in a lot of ways. And I was reading a lot of books at the time. And I was reading a book about serendipity, how everything happens for a reason. And I was opening my mind to just symbols, you know, more and more. And it's weird, acting chose me. It just kept coming back into my life. So I pursued it And then when I was in those classrooms for the first time, I heard the word humanity in a classroom, but I heard it said in a very different way than I've ever heard it. You know, we had great teachers. It just so happened that they were mostly African American teachers from New York, and I've never been to New York at the time. And they were talking about in a way that had the undertone of, you know, the social movement. You know, that's what the core of their arts came from, and I was so moved by that. I think it echoed, you know, what I saw in Molière about a decade ago. And I, at the time, only wanted to open my own theater company and just, the first thing I wanted to do was I wanted to do Hamlet, but I wanted to do Hamlet in Harlem, or Hamlet in New York, or Hamlet in, you know, in the suburbs. And I wanted to show why this was a story that was not, it's not like I think what I really wanted to show was that high dramatic classical art is not an exclusive thing that is in relation to social status, but that people who are really, truly the Hamlets of the world are those kids in the ghetto. They can understand what it's like, you know, to have their kingdoms taken away from them. That's Hamlet. That person can understand it just as much, if not better, than the high, you know, the guy who grew up with a silver spoon. So that was my desire when I started coming into it. I wanted to do, that was, you know, the acting bug. It kind of started out of that. And I've had, it's like a flu, you know. I've had a love and hate relationship with it. I don't always like it, and sometimes I love it and sometimes I hate it. Not like the flu, but I mean, it has, what I mean is that the bug has flu-like symptoms, where sometimes you really don't like it.
Right.
You're
but
like,
sometimes
I hate
you
this.
feel high from it, you know, like just like a flu.
Exactly. And just like Hermès, you know, Hermès says, you know, there's a law in life. Everything that goes up must come down. So it has these incredible highs, and you got to learn to decelerate, because or else you crash. And I've crashed many times where it's like boom, and then you're home alone in your hotel room in a city that you've never been, and people at the front desk know who you are, and it's a bit awkward, and there's this girl that you think is cute, and you kind of want to go for coffee, but it's kind of weird because you're this actor, and it's so, and it's incredibly lonely and sad, but you got to learn to decelerate.
You have a scene in this movie, The Hummingbird Project, where you have to tell a story and you're driving a car. Whenever I see a scene where someone tells a story, I have this panic.
Well, here's the thing. You don't want to focus on telling the story.
That's what I was going to ask you.
So you don't, I mean, in my experience, man, look, this is an acting podcast, right? So a lot of people listening to this are probably actors.
Right.
So I'm going to speak directly to the actors. And a lot of actors who are truly care about the craft are seeking something. They're seeking something higher. They want to reach a level, they want to experience something profound, something big, something great, you know what I mean? So don't focus on acting. Don't focus on trying to be good. Focus on the thing that you're searching for. You know, when you're telling a story, you have a big monologue coming, and we all do it. You know, it's easier to preach about it and say, yeah, you know, focus on the art. But I'm a victim to it. I've got vanity in me, and I've got no shame to admit it because it's a part of my survival mechanism. But that's not what that's not what I lead with. You know what I mean? And when you have let's say a big monologue like in the movie, you don't want to focus on the fact that you have a big monologue, because that's just like, it's like you put one step at a time, right? First, you know, like climbing a mountain, you don't look at the peak and like, how do I get there? You get there by getting there, one step at a time. But more than that, I would say, you focus on what does the monologue mean to you? What am I talking? Am I talking about this love, this woman that I loved all my life, that hurt me? Why am I sharing that story? What does that mean to me? Why is that important for other people to hear? Why is that important for me as a person, not just an actor? And when you focus on that, and you hopefully find the other actor to be receptive to it, then you share that human experience, and before you know it, the monologue is done. And it's not about the monologue, it's about that experience. And same thing with anything you do, I think. Focus on what does it mean? What's the intention? And the good thing about that is you're bulletproof, because it doesn't matter if people like it. It's almost like the meaning is superior than the reception, because you know what it means to you. You know, it might not have the same meaning 5 years from now to you, but at that moment you can always go back and say, I know exactly why I did what I did.
Oh, I like that.
When I moved from Montreal to Toronto for my acting career, I lived in a house that was, no joke, not bigger than this room. This room was actually bigger than the place I lived in. And I slept on a cot. And it was too small, so I couldn't open the drawer of the cabinet where my socks and stuff were. It would hit the bed.
I know this.
I had a TV on top of it, and I would eat once a day because I had no money. I swear, man, I would boil an egg, boil some rice, put a spoon of mayo. I would eat around 7 p.m. so I wouldn't sleep hungry.
It's kind of like an egg salad type thing.
Man, I didn't even know what that was, it was delicious. Boiled eggs, rice, and a mayo. If anybody's starving out there, this is a good way. And then I would rent a VHS for like $1 or $1.50 and watch it. And I was the happiest man in the world because I was doing what I loved. And there was no pressure. I wasn't trying to be famous, or I wasn't trying to be rich. I wanted to be good. That's all I cared about. And I knew that I could be good if it was just up to me, because all it takes is practice. All it takes is believing in yourself, diving deeper. And that doesn't cost any money.
Wow.
I was very fortunate, you know, my dad, my father is a chemist, and at times, you know, he'd never worked in his field, but at times we were very rich growing up. And at times we were extremely poor, which is kind of weird because most people are either one or the other. But we really experienced both. And what I admire my father for, one of the reasons I admire my father, is we never ever felt poor when we were poor. I mean, we would eat canned beef and eggs, and we would have to wait every second weekend to buy fruits, you know, and we weren't living in North America, we were living in other countries, but I never felt it. Never felt it, you know, and I think that really shaped a lot of who I was. And that's important for actors to know because, man, your feet, you know, are only so big. You can only stand on a specific corner of the house no matter how big your house is. Your body's only so big. You just need a small little place to sleep. Doesn't matter how big your bed is. And your stomach is only so big. So all this other luxury is fine, is great, don't get me wrong, but it really doesn't make you that much happy. I mean, look, I don't want to say that you know, people who have money don't have access to healthcare and all that stuff. But I'm saying if you're, God willing, you're healthy and you're young, you got everything you need, man.
That's right.
Even if you're not young, as long as hopefully you're healthy. And if you're not healthy, as long as your mind is healthy.
And that's so good. You can only fit so much into your stomach a day.
Yeah, man.
You know, I mean, it doesn't, it gets up and it goes in there and it gets churned around. It just becomes the thing that...
And it's not even that good to eat as much as we used to think, you know, 5-6 times. It's like, there's so many misconceptions about what really makes you happy. I find with age that I'm realizing, man, I don't need any of that stuff. Not that don't get me wrong, not that I don't like it. I enjoy driving a nice car. If it's a fast car, it's fun. You know, but it's really not what makes me happy. And sometimes you got to remind yourself that.
We've gotten to know you a little bit in this episode, and we've gotten to know that you take this seriously, and you approach this thing in a serious way.
I approach all of life metaphysically.
I can see that.
I try.
That's what I'm talking about.
Sometimes I fail, but I try.
But tell me what it's like to be recognized for a show that has this rabid fan base. And so I want to know what this does to you as an actor, but then also when you're now you're going back and you're doing this next season. Does this ever get to your head in there, where it's where you know that there's people that are responding so rabidly to everything?
It's interesting, okay, because you need to evolve. In my opinion, this is not I'm not preaching here. I'm just, you know, sharing my experience. You need to evolve. I like to evolve as a person and as an artist. When you start off your career, you know, I was incredibly insecure about who I was. I remember when I got up in the classrooms, you know, at the Dome Theater in Montreal, where I studied for 3 years, I would shake. My hands, my bones would shake. I would be in front of 15, 14 students, and I would shake. My teacher kept telling me, your voice is cracking, I can't hear what you're saying. And I remember sleeping in that little apartments, you know, being completely broke, living out of a garbage bag, pretty much. And going to school in the morning on the train, in the metro, and memorizing, you know, like a monologue from Shakespeare, like Shylock, you know, hath not a Jew eyes, you know.
Yeah.
And reciting that on the subway. And then as I'm reciting it, I would get up, change seats, and then slowly get up and just randomly change seats while everybody was sitting in the morning looking at me like, why is this guy whispering and just casually, respectfully changing seats? The reason why I did that is because I knew that I wasn't doing anything wrong. If I was sitting on the subway and I wanted to change seats, then it was fine for me to do that, right? It was also fine for me to very quietly whisper, you know, Shakespeare to myself, because it puts me at ease right at the time. But I was so scared of being judged that felt like the most monumental thing that I could do that day. It was like my greatest fear to do that. And as I started doing that, or getting the courage to speak to someone that I didn't know, I started slowly getting over my stage fright, right? Now, people at the end of my 3 years say, you know, now that you've got a career, it changed you. But it's not the fame that changes you, or the career that changes you, or those things that get to your head. And I'll get to that in a minute to see where I'm going with it. But it's the process, because when you see an actor who's, let's say, incredibly famous, what you have to realize is that there's an experience that you know, but there's this whole other experience that no one understands, that person's going through. So to answer that is, it does change you. It changes people around you, but not always in a bad way where it gets to your head. And sometimes it forces you to have more confidence, which people say, oh, now you're cocky. And you're like, no, now I'm confident. But that's something that everyone should have, and that I implore everybody else to have. So does it get to my head? No, because I'm gonna die. And just like the Egyptians say, you know, the weight of my heart is more important than the weight of my bank account. So I don't care about that stuff at all. I mean, truthfully, sometimes I'll be vain, and yeah, it'll make me happy, and I love the people who love me, and it means the world to me, don't get me wrong. But in the grand scope of things, when I die, it's not important, and I'm aware of that. So no, it doesn't really matter to me. But yes, it changes you, because you go through so much. And don't mistake changing for necessarily it getting to your head. Because it would be very sad if you go through all that and you're exactly the same person without having grown.
Good point.
Do you see what I mean?
Yes, yes. Michael Mando, thank you.
Thank you for
this.
I feel like we, I don't know if that last bit made any sense.
It did.
Did it? Yeah?
It sure did.
Cool.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of IFP, the Independent Filmmaker Project. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.